it was just a fleeting thought that sort of occurred at the beginning of the talk that I tried to push to the back of my mind. But through the talk, different elements kept pulling it back. So I'm going to try to make 2 points and hopefully in a sensible way connect the dots. The first is you began with talking about movement as being a lack of stillness. And I was just thinking about that because something about that fell off. So I was wondering how would I sort of define movement. So when you say lack of stillness, it's a very physical lens with which to view it, or like a very tactical way to look at it.
Right.
I was thinking about it more in the form of acting on intention, right? So when you put it that way, even the sculpture is movement, except it's moving through time. Sculptor's intention captured, that's moving through time.
That's right. Yeah.
That sort of, it was a fleeting thought I sort of put at the back of my mind. Later when you brought up your illustration of the activity that we did, where interpretations came into play, right?
Yeah.
So I was just thinking, if instead of passing on instructions, if you had handed out intentions, intention saying, okay, how do you illustrate a fear of holding a snake? So when you look at it that way, there's room for diversity of interpretation, and there's a tangible way to assess whether something is right or not. Like as a viewer, I can say, okay, I could see that the performance told me about a fear of holding a snake. So when you said the trouble with studying the dance forms in India, I was just thinking about it from that perspective. And I guess most of the text is instructional rather than intentional.
Yep.
And perhaps that's where the issue is.
So the first is that, yes, it is true that sculptures are moving through time. That is the subject of a different talk. I think there's one on YouTube that I've given for the University of Venice, if you want to look into that. The temple is a house. It's a devalaya, house of God, right? And it is a recreation of the cosmos on Earth. And I'm going to try to not get super technical here. But the reason why we have dance in temple spaces is because there's dance in the cosmos as a function of keeping cosmic time. So without getting too abstract, the purpose of dance is that there is actually a continuum of dance occurring in that space, because you have entered the cosmos and now there's dance in that space. So yes, it is a matter of moving through time. That's correct. And I agree with that perspective. The second thing is, well, if you're looking at intentionality, there are many, many different ways in which one can manifest that intentionality. If I was a contemporary dance practitioner, I could just use different formations of my body to demonstrate fear of a snake. But unfortunately, the kind of resources that I'm working with are highly codified and highly specific. And that is sometimes more of a challenge than it is a help, because you don't have the room and you don't have the freedom to say, oh, well, I mean, I'm just going to take this and interpret. I'm sure you can, but that wouldn't qualify as scholarship in that sense. It would qualify as an interpretation, which is also fair. One of the challenges of scholarship is actually being able to have substantive evidence and say that, okay, this chapter, this verse, this is what was said, and it correlates with this particular sculpture and this particular movement. And in doing that, we are able to understand intention, because sometimes the text will give you an emotion that the sculpture is supposed to have, or sometimes they'll give you a color or a cast or some other intangible information about that movement system or about that image that gives you a sense of intentionality beyond the physical. But this is not a form that's open to that kind of interpretation in that kind of way, that anything goes. Of course, the way it's practiced now is more or less like that. But the way I'm trying to approach it is a bit more rooted in what has been and what we can take from what has been in what we want to create. So I think that's a great idea. And I think we should also maybe do one more activity at some point where we do actually say, okay, now we're looking at intention. And is intention different than physical manifestation. So great thoughts, great perspective. Thank you for sharing.
So we discussed instructions and then we discussed intent. But I think the thing that you brought out last was maybe the integrity of the form.
Yeah.
And since, a part of the talk also was looking at, say, what Doordarshan did and how it was so instructive, maybe even interpretationally, like her interpretation being like the final word on it. When do you think the integrity of Bharatanatyam stops being Bharatanatyam if somebody were to make it too subjective? And do you think there's a soul to the integrity that has to be restricted with some rules?
You're going to get me killed. No. Very simply put, I think you can have somebody who is part of the Pandanallur style who believes a movement should be done like this, and then they're from the Vallur style and they do the same movement like this, and it doesn't have the beautiful arch. And both of them are correct. They're both valid. They're both hereditary. They're both traditional. They both conform to the text. They both conform to the sculpture. That's the problem. So then where do you draw the line? So can I do Bharatanatyam to Bollywood dance music and then say that it's authentic? Is it only on form that it's authentic? Is it the music? Is it the costume? The costume I'm wearing today is actually a very traditional drape from the history of dance in Karnataka. And it's part of my IFA research. When I was doing research on temples in this area, I found out that all of the temple dancers who lived here actually come from Andhra Pradesh. And they come from Andhra Pradesh in the same location, which shares a border with Orissa. So this drape was actually draped by the Orissan temple dancers, the Odissi dancers. And the Devadasis in Karnataka wore the same drape and danced in temples here. Because I'm not wearing a 5-piece costume, does that make it less authentic? Is it more authentic because it's a historical drape? Or is it authentic because it's the same fabric? And so it doesn't matter what you do with the fabric as long as you drape it and it kind of looks like a sari-ish. I don't know. I've been struggling with this question for more than 15 years. What makes Bharatanatyam Bharatanatyam? And the one thing which I have come up with is we know what Bharatanatyam is not, right? We know that it's not a form that's performed in like a bar, for example, right? But that doesn't mean it can't be performed in a bar. Like I've performed it at a pub situation like this. It was like a lecture. So if it's not the form and it's not the space and it's not the costume and it's not the music, what is it? Is that now I've figured out that there's no definition. Is there a way to standardize an understanding? Even if we don't standardize a definition, is there a way that as a scholar, I can leave to you as part of my legacy a roadmap to understanding this? And at the very least, I can say, hey, these are the places I've been. These are the understandings I've gained. Now it's up to you to figure out what you think dance is. In terms of learning, I am currently training. I'm still training with Dr. Yashoda Thakur, who's a dancer, scholar who has a PhD in dance studies, but is also from a family of Kalavantulu dancers. So she's learned in her family all of the original repertoire. She's one of the last surviving traditional temple dancers. And I'm also training with Muthu Kanamal, who's the last surviving, she's 82 years old. She's the last surviving Devadasi of Pudukkottai. And so I go to Tamil Nadu and I stay in her little house and I train with her. So I am still learning, and it is very intimidating to train with hereditary practitioners. It's not like going to dance class where everything is safe and understood. Muthu Kanamal Pati will put a pan bida in her mouth and she'll sit on her veranda and put her arm on her folded knee and she'll tell me in Tamil, she'll be like, Aadu, dance, And I'll be like, dance to what? She's like, Unak paatu varada, do you not know how to sing? I was like, well, I don't know how to sing now. And she's like, so one second, you're trying to do dance without music. And then do you know poetry? Do you know Telugu? I'm like, no, I don't know Telugu. And So it's a constant process of humbling, because the more I learn, the more I realize that dancers today actually don't have the skills required. We need to know sculpture, we need to know poetry, we need to know music, we need to know how to play the mridangam. These are things that all of us should be learning to actually do justice to this form. And so I think for me, it's now a lifelong process of how do I put the pieces together, at least in an effort to understand my own practice, if nothing else. Okay, so I was given a grant by the India Foundation for the Arts. I think I briefly talked about the research. I wanted to look into the temple tradition of Bangalore, because I think there is a lot written about Karnataka and there's too much written about Tamil Nadu, in my opinion. And I was like, well, Bangalore's got to have had dancers, right? Because we had a temple culture. And so as I was doing research, I uncovered an 19th century text that was written by a Devadasi who was a dancer attached to the Alsur Someshwara temple in Alsur, which is still there. If you guys haven't gone, you should absolutely check it out. It's a beautiful Vijayanagara period temple complex. And her name was Venkata Sundarasani. And she, in her text, mentions the most amazing thing. She has a list of codifications that she believes in. So what's really cool about her codifications, and I'm writing a book on this, I'm in talks with Penguin to get it published, but she will write a code in the text, which she's taken from Natya Shastra, then she'll annotate it. She'll be like, all this is bullshit, you just need these 5 things. And like, she'll just notate the 5 things that she uses, and she'll be like, yeah, you can ignore the rest, it's cool. And so what's cool about that is it's the only text in existence which is written by a practitioner and not by an old Brahmin man. So you have a different perspective on the movement system. And so that's kind of what my entire project was about. Sundara was 3.5 years of my life full-time. I worked with weavers in Arani to recreate the textiles of that era exactly correctly. They had to put they had to feed a new pattern into the loom because it had never been done before. I worked with jewelry makers of the Ekambareshwara temple in Kanchi to get all the jewelry authentically correct. I worked with silversmiths and goldsmiths to understand the foot ornamentation. There's about 15 ornaments that women of that period used to wear only on their foot. And one of the things I realized through that project was that there were also all kinds of limitations on the movement. Because a woman is dancing in the Garbhagriha, right? She was a woman that was dancing directly in front of the Sanctum Sanctorum. She wasn't allowed to lift her foot. So all these lovely Bhujanga Trasita Karnas where you're like, kicking people and lifting your feet, that none of that would have been performed in that way. You can't turn your back to face the god. So with all of these physical limitations and 15 ornaments on your foot, so you can't really hit your foot too hard, but every time you put your foot down, it makes a nice clinking sound. So there is an oral aesthetic, there is a sonic aesthetic to this, which goes beyond just the gungrus or the salange, right, the ankle bells. And so I had to kind of deconstruct every part of how she would have danced in that space. And I put together a 90-minute production on her life and times that was done with the temple musicians who are 8th generation Nadaswaram and tabla players of the Alsur Someshwara temple. So their forefathers were people who would have been alive when she was alive. And they played all of the traditional repertoire, which is part of the production and part of the soundscape of the production. We had all the music set, which was authentic repertoire of this area, of this geographical area. Some compositions in Tamil, some in Kannada, and some in Telugu. And we also had the authentic Mallari, which is the piece where they bring the god out and they take him out for ritual procession. So we had that piece from that particular temple recreated entirely on stage. So that took about 3.5 years of my life We produced it in and staged it in a tiny place in Malleshwaram called Seva Sadhan. And we had musicians come from Madras for the vocal and the mridangam, and the Nadaswaram and Taval from Bangalore. It was mammoth effort and required a lot of documentation and a lot of research, but that also got me into a lot of trouble. And there was like angry CMBLR practitioners in my inbox being like, you Brahmin, insert expletive here. I can't believe that as a Brahmin woman, you feel entitled to do this. And how are you any different than all the Brahmin women who came and appropriated dance before you? You're no better than Rukmini Devi Arundel, et cetera, right? Insert rhetoric here. And then sort of these marauding political extreme right-wing guys in my inbox being like, oh, die, I'm gonna rape you. Like, this is, how can a woman of your stature from this community choose to highlight, a woman who is, of the community of prostitutes, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, it is just horrible how political it got. I mean, here I was sort of locked up in a library somewhere in deep Tanjavur trying to find sources, not seeing it at all as an act of politics or an act of political identity. But anybody who studied social science or the arts will know the personal really is political. And every decision you make is politically invested. I didn't know it at the time. Lucky to have studied at JNU, which gave me the courage to face it all, and also had the professors who had the background to back me up and to explain to me that scholarship is king. It doesn't matter what you say, don't say, which party you're part of. If you can show me evidence to the contrary, I'm willing to listen to you. That was always my rhetoric, and that continues to be my rhetoric. And Sundara was amazing, and hopefully I get to publish that book in the next year or two and share all of that research with you. And please come to the book launch and buy lots of books and gift them to all your friends. Thank you all, and thank you for being such a wonderful crowd. Thank you.